January 13th, 1982. A helicopter crew has rescued 3 survivors of the crash of Air Florida Flight 90. But 3 more are still in the icy Potomac River. One of the survivors, Priscilla Tirado, is groping on the ice, crying out for help. The chopper crew drops a life ring. But she appears to be going into shock, blinded by jet fuel. She struggles to grab hold of the buoy. Finally, Priscilla clings on, and the chopper slowly drags her towards shore. Her head is barely above the water, and moments later, her arm slips through the life ring. Civilian Lenny Skutnik is watching from the riverbank.
As soon as the arm comes out, I realize she's not going to make it. Something just hit me. It was another human being in very serious trouble. So I take my boots off and my coat, and I dive in after her.
Skutnik swims out to Priscilla just as her head is slipping beneath the surface.
And just as I get to her, her face is under the water. You know, it's like one of those horror movies where you see somebody in a bathtub. Well, I just get her head above water and just start pushing and stroking. Get her close enough to the bank to a fireman who grabbed her.
Paramedics rush Priscilla Tirado to a waiting ambulance. The chopper crew returns for Nikki Felch. She can't grab the ring. Pilot Don Usher lowers the helicopter so far that the skid is actually under the water. Then Gene Windsor grabs Nikki. She struggles, but manages to throw a leg over his boot.
I pulled her up as far as I could get her. I held on to her and I told Don, let's go.
After dropping off Felch, the chopper crew turns its attention to the 6th person in the water, the unidentified man, who was tangled up in the wreckage and had passed the rescue line on to others.
Went to the same spot, expected to see the same face with the hands holding onto the fuselage. There was nothing there. So we hovered around, we looked everywhere. The fuselage had sunk a little bit and turned a little bit.
The last survivor is gone. Don Usher and Gene Windsor fly over the wreckage for about 20 minutes, but find nothing. By 5 p.m., with darkness falling, the park police call off the helicopter search. In the days after the crash of Flight 90, an autopsy reveals the identity of the man who could not be saved. He is a bank examiner from Atlanta, 46-year-old Arland Williams. The wreckage of the plane, the wheels, fuselage, and tail section is reassembled.
They get all the pieces of the aircraft together, line them up approximately as the airplane should be assembled, and then start looking for things. A good engineer can tell an awful lot by looking at fractured pieces of metal.
As the investigation gets underway, the immediate focus is on the terrible weather. Investigators also focus on human performance in the snowstorm, how the pilots reacted in severe weather conditions.
If this crew just hadn't had that experience in their flying background, it's reasonable that they just didn't know what they were dealing with.
These suspicions are confirmed when investigators analyze the so-called black boxes, which are actually orange and contain the cockpit voice recorder. In examining the tape, investigators realized the crew underestimated the severity of ice buildup on the wings of the aircraft.
They could see that other airplanes were being contaminated with ice, and for some reason it just didn't register with them that they were getting in a very dangerous situation.
It's really effective. The danger may have been compounded when the pilot had earlier used his reverse thrust to try to back out of the gate. Such a move would kick up slush, possibly blocking engine sensors. Investigators also discover that a key engine sensor was frozen. They determined that the pilot's neglect
provided incorrect engine readings to the cockpit because they were iced over.
It is not until they're accelerating down the runway that the first officer and co-pilot Roger Pettit realizes there's a problem and mentions it to the pilot Larry Wheaton.
With the question the first officer raised several times, 4 times with the captain, things don't look right.
There's 80, refers to an appropriate acceleration reading of 80 knots. But co-pilot Pettit questions it.
There was clearly a question in his mind, and the captain did not respond by aborting.
The captain thought he had enough power for takeoff, but the cockpit tape reveals otherwise.
In this case, we could pick up a frequency coming from the engines. We can figure out how fast the engine is turning.
As Flight 90 took off, the co-pilot's suspicions were correct. The engines weren't providing enough power. Cockpit gauges showed a false high reading. The pilot finally realizes it as he desperately tries to control the plane. After a 7-month investigation, the National Transportation Safety Board issues its final report on the crash of Flight 90. And the aviation industry makes some sweeping changes. That's next.